if I was going to be in charge, I wanted to make sure who I was putting into these positions was not only going to get paid well, have a great career, advance their skills, but I wanted them to have a lasting impression on the community.
All right, welcome to another edition of the Growth Game podcast. I'm your host, Paul DeLuca, CEO of Meritus Capital. We're happy today to have Jessica Meyers of Porchlight. We're super excited about our conversation today and just getting to know each other. So, Jessica, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today.
Thank you for having me.
This should be fun. So I love these podcasts where it's also the first time we're getting to meet each other because it's so much more of a fluid conversation. So it's just great. So Jessica, I'll just give you a quick little backgrounder on me and how I got into staffing, and then we can frame our conversation. I came from a family that had essentially a specialty staffing company. It was in the skilled trades side of the business. And so I worked in the business in the early 90s and then started my first company in the 90s. And it was basically doing specialty staffing. I did that for a while, grew my company. I was not a banker, but I appreciated that you needed capital to grow in this business. So I went out and started my first fund, and it's been great. Since then, financed about 800 staffing companies. I still get up every day and enjoy helping companies grow. And so every day we're kind of always focused on temporary staffing, contract staffing, and growth. And so that's my background. But I'd love to learn a little bit about your journey and how you came to be in your current business.
Yeah, so I did not come from this is not the family business.
Yeah.
Um,
Okay.
I had been in sales and recruiting for years and
Mhm.
years. I come from healthcare recruiting where I started with allied staffing and did a lot of SNFs and long-term care facilities and into school contracts. I loved the first company I worked for, and
Mhm.
other people loved it so much that we got purchased and
Okay.
rolled into a large healthcare staffing company, a publicly traded healthcare staffing company that really opened up opportunities for us to recruit into IRL. So we were doing cath lab and med techs and all of that stuff. And my previous boss had jettisoned out during the merge. She went to a tiny staffing company and recruited me to be the director of recruitment. They were launching a travel nurse division. And so
Okay.
I went over, launched the travel nurse division, worked there, launched a schools division, and then had all of this healthcare experience. And it was through that experience that I really saw that it was my passion is rural. And so I'm an old farm kid. I grew up on a dairy farm in the middle, central part of South Dakota, and and saw that many times it's healthcare and schools are the largest employers in those small towns. So started Porchlight with the focus of supporting rural workforce development. So now our company, we focus solely on direct hires. We'll do long-term contracts and government contracting, but for the most part, it's direct hire. And what's different about Porchlight is that we focus solely on rural. So it's not just healthcare that we recruit in. We work across industry. If it's rural or the company has a rural footprint, we will recruit it. So we're in renewable energy, cannabis, labor, light industrial, healthcare, education, you name it, we're in it. And it's really, really fabulous. The other side of the business is us protecting our investment with those employees. So if we're moving someone, a middle or high skilled employee into a rural community, we want their whole family to make that community their home. And so our community side of the business is where we partner along with the communities and we help them create those systems that will support the family to move back. So we're not just recruiting the individual employee, but we're recruiting families to come back, get little
Right.
Johnny stuck into a T-ball. You know, your spouse has got a job, whether it's remote or a job in
Mhm.
town, but we sister along those communities to help make sure that those skilled workers are staying in these rural areas.
Super interesting angle, and obviously you're impacting the community and the people as well as as being able to have a business that services the needs. But very interesting. This focus on rural. I get it now. You're passionate about it. You grew up in a rural area. I lived in rural America some growing up as well, and I do remember the impact of either having or not having services that you may take for granted when you're in a city. And so, to the extent that you have that, this is people driven, and they have to be able to have a work life balance that's enjoyable and that they're happy to be there. I think that's really great. It's interesting about the fact that you're really doing permanent, and I get why. I find that so many rural opportunities when you have a temporary worker, let's say for instance a 13-week travel assignment for a nurse, it's just so hard for them to also find joy in their day-to-day life during that 13-week assignment if they're in a place that isn't meaningful to them.
Yeah. I actually placed a travel PT into
Uh-huh.
my rural hospital, like where
Okay.
my cousins work.
Yeah.
And and she was coming from Washington State, and she said, "I have a license in South Dakota and I haven't used it yet. Where can I go?" And so I pulled up in our ATS and I went, "Oh my gosh, my hometown has a travel PT position." And so she
Nice.
was making, she was making great money, but
Yeah.
I got to see both sides of it, right? Like,
Right.
this is my hometown. You're
Right.
working with my cousins and you are servicing
Hmm.
my aunts and uncles because they are the
Right.
boomers. And so
Right.
I know the care. So all of a sudden, I'm not a recruiter,
Hmm.
I'm a
Yeah.
townie. And in my
Yeah.
head, I was like, I need you to provide my family excellent care. And it
Right.
put me in the game. And then I was
Oh
able to
wow.
see it from her side too, where she was
Hmm.
like, there is nothing to do here. I'm going to
Hmm.
teach myself how to knit and I'm going to rewatch Gilmore Girls in this weird apartment that I'm staying in because the
Right.
community doesn't have a ton of apartments.
Right.
And so it really opened up my eyes. That was actually the transformational placement for me that
Got it.
really showed that I needed to, like, if I was in charge, this was
Hmm.
years before I was in charge.
Sure.
Um, if I was going to be in charge, I wanted to make sure that who I was putting into these positions was not only going to get paid well, have a great career, advance their skills, but I wanted them to have a lasting impression on the community. And through her, I was able to see that the whole hospital is run on travelers, which is ridiculously expensive. The DOR was doing everything he can to woo them to stay. He was saying, "I will pay your student loans off if you stay for 2 years." Because what happens in specifically in rural hospitals, we all know as staffing agencies, the people will show up if the price is right. And which you'll get those placements, but at what cost to the health system? And what kind of care is that for the people that call that place their home? And so it is the direct hire for me personally, and where Porchlight is right now, it is the direct hires that we're seeing that the research shows this and our anecdotal experience with candidates are showing people want to move back. They just don't know how to get back. And that it was placing somebody in my home hospital, what absolutely changed my tune.
Very interesting. So obviously, it's a very different business model than most recruiters
Mhm.
are doing. Certainly sounds like you're going above and beyond to impact the lifestyle of not only your placement but also, like you said, the town that has hopefully has somebody long term that wants to be there, which I'm sure that equates to quality of care improvement as well. But from a business model perspective, how are you able to offer this extra level of service and be able to stay competitive?
So I tell everybody this: we're doing everything backwards and the hardest way possible. and we know it. But it is having an immeasurable difference of an impact in these the employers and in the community. And that's what's so cool about this. I mean, if we were going to do it the easy way, we would continue recruiting in the large systems, we would get into VMSs, and we would just, be shooting fish in a barrel like always. But when we look at the research of rural communities, our sweet spot, to make it even more impossible, is there's two different definitions of a rural community. The federal definition is populations of 50,000 and fewer. And when my husband and I lived in New York City and in Chicago, 50,000 was like the teeniest town that we could think of. Well, communities of 50,000 and communities that are larger than 50,000 make up 3 communities in the state of South Dakota. That's it. So everybody is under the size of 50,000. So our sweet spot is
In your
actually
target
communities.
market of the state is what you're saying.
Well, that's what the federal definition is of a rural
Yeah,
community, anything
right.
50,000 and fewer.
Got it.
So the communities that don't fit that are only 3 communities in our state. So if you look at what the average size of a community is in America, it's populations of 5,000 and fewer. So in South Dakota, this is my hometown or my home state is South Dakota. So populations of 5,000 and fewer make up 95% of our communities. But if you expand that to America, it's 75% of our communities fall within that category.
Wow.
So,
From a count
right,
perspective, obviously. Okay.
from a community standpoint, populations of
Yeah.
5,000 and fewer make up 75% of our communities in America.
Wow.
So when you
Wow.
look at it that way, there's more opportunity than you think. And in those communities, many of the community leaders, they're working part-time or they're volunteer. The mayor has a full-time job and is mayor on the side compared to the mayor of Chicago, where it is definitely a full-time job. So and the other thing that's happening, and this relates directly to healthcare, the aging population in rural communities is 3 times the size of a more urban environment. So we have an aging population, and an aging population requires access to healthcare. And so if you have your parents or your grandparents that are needing to go to a cardiologist or a urologist or whoever, and the average commute time is 3.5 hours, that's a full day off of work. Or can we get somebody to come in that has maybe a rural route that does it's traveling, but we get creative on what that specialty care looks like in rural communities. I'm way more interested in that because I know that we're going to be able to keep mom and dad or grandma and grandpa closer to
Yeah.
home
Yeah.
instead of having to travel all the time to get to those
Hmm.
larger hospitals.
And keep them healthy. Very very
Yep.
cool. Well, I mean, your business model has much more than just a profit motive, and I appreciate really what you're doing. You've got a purpose, and it sounds like a really great one. So you're doing something really interesting, and I love it. I love what you're doing. So talk to me a little bit about as a business owner, as you know, that transition from being an employee to being a business owner, an entrepreneur. What are some of the most surprising things that you learned?
So I may be I may be speaking I I I only tell the truth. So be forewarned. And I will say
That's all I
this.
ever want.
The
Transparency
biggest
and truth.
yes. So the biggest surprise is that there are no rules. You get to make up your rules. And
Yep.
it's so much easier when you are the employee and you can say, "Oh man, this sucks because this is out
Yeah.
of my control." Well, now everything is in my control. And so
Yeah.
I get to decide, what is our sick
Right.
policy? What is our
Right.
PTO?
It's so much easier to rely on somebody else to make those
Correct.
policies. Yeah. Very
Right.
well said. Interesting. All right. Talk to me about some of your biggest challenges and how you overcame them.
I think it was right at first figuring out what the model was going to be. Were we going to do a temp to hire? I mean, we did attempt to hire in a previous company and that was really great. Um, but that also brings up ideas of, okay, are we going to have in-house accounting? Are we going to have in-house HR? Do we have a credentialing? Do I, farm that out? What is it? So, it was figuring out all of those systems, figuring out ATS system we wanted to have, and dating all of those and finally making the decision and going, okay, this if we're in forever. And
Right,
this is
right.
what it's
Yeah,
going to
pretty
look like.
much. Because once you take that technological leap, it's really hard to convert out. So yeah, very, very
Yes.
interesting. Do you mind me asking who you ended up going with
We're
from an
using
ATS?
Zoho.
Zoho.
We
Okay,
use
cool.
we use Zoho Recruit. Well, we have Zoho One. They've got about 42 different apps that are in there, which we're clearly not using all of them. I mean, because we figured there's room to grow. In the past, I've used Bullhorn in the past as well. Bullhorn is ridiculously popular. So there's a lot of really good systems out there. Zoho's been really good. I've liked the ease of getting things onto job boards, and
Yeah,
it's integrated perfectly into our website. So it's been really, really
nice.
handy.
Very cool. Talk to me about some of your most valuable lessons. And those could be directly from your business, or what's the most valuable things that you as an individual learned in this transition to being an entrepreneur?
I think um, personally, I learned that I can trust myself in making these
Mhm.
decisions,
Yeah,
and that I didn't realize that I needed to teach myself that. Like, that was
right.
really cool to say, okay, let's make this decision. We don't know all of the answers and we don't know what the
Yeah.
outcome's going to be, but let's blow it up. Let's see what
But you
happens.
got to take a leap, make a decision, and run with it. Right. Okay. So
Yes.
that was a. It takes a while to learn that,
hmm
and very
it
cool.
has been, terrifying. And when you start, you're just that one man person, right? So you're banging your own drum saying, okay, we're doing this. But I got really solid in what our vision was for the company and how we wanted to operate. And after that, we were off to the races. And people seem to agree with what we're doing. And as we continue to grow, I mean, especially with the direct hire model going specifically into rural, we know that those community salaries, when you put a new salary into a rural area, it turns over 7 times in that community. So when you're bringing
Huge
in,
impact to the community.
yes, like if you're bringing in a nurse or a doctor or a teacher,
Mhm.
those two largest employers in a community, and you can roll over a
Yeah.
$65,000 a year salary 7 times
Right.
into a community, everybody
Right.
benefits.
Yeah, very cool. Yeah, huge benefit to the communities. You would almost think that this is such a great vision. You would almost think that these communities are trying to recruit you to have create the impact for their town. It'd be great. I'd love to see, if you haven't done this already. I think it'd be really neat to pair up with maybe some of your best communities. Almost do a little study that kind of shows this model and how it can be replicated across, because you're adding so much more value than just
Yes.
supplying staff. Now, as you look at the different way that you've changed, you were first healthcare, and now you're shifting into really just focus on rural. How has that looked? And like, what you still have a heavy rural or a heavy healthcare focus, or
Mhm.
how have you started to penetrate the other industries?
It's what's so interesting is that I look at the community side with our community research versus how we're going in with, like, if a company reaches out and says that we need help recruiting.
Mhm. Yeah.
When we Depending on how we get our contact through new
Mhm.
business development, it's amazing to see who reaches out to us from a business standpoint and then says we need your help. So
Got it.
getting getting into different industries, it has actually not been difficult. And
Hmm.
my favorite industry to work in is manufacturing and light industrial.
Yeah.
I
Okay.
think
Why is
it has
that?
been it's it's regular people
Yeah.
that when
Yeah.
we're looking at healthcare,
Hmm.
like if you have gotten to the point in your education where you have a compact nurse license and can work in
Yeah.
42 states, or you have your NBCOT. I mean,
Mhm.
these are postgraduate, highly educated people, which
Yeah.
we absolutely need these people in this world. But we
Mhm.
also need to employ the workers, and we
Yeah.
need
Pe-
to, and the
People are
people,
willing to get in there and get their fingers dirty and build
that's
something,
right.
right?
If we look at an American strategy to bring back manufacturing and to bring
Yeah.
back work to America, we need to also create these job opportunities for skilled labor. They may not have a 4-year degree, but they have 20 years of hands-on
Mhm.
experience.
Right.
And these are people that want to provide for their families, they want to work in their communities,
Right.
and it's really cool.
Yeah, that's
I mean,
great.
I love recruiting both, don't get me wrong,
Yeah.
because
Sure.
there's something really nice about saying, "Hi, you just got a $120,000 salary,
Yeah.
congratulations." That
Yeah.
makes that makes my life as a staffing agency a little bit easier.
Right.
But if I'm looking at rural impact,
Yeah.
it is manufacturing and light industrial to be able to
Yeah.
provide incomes for them is really, really cool.
I love that shift, and it's interesting. This has some crossover with some of the other things that I've been doing. We primarily finance staffing agencies, but our second largest financing group this last year has been manufacturing and distribution,
Yes.
primarily manufacturing, and it's been companies that are onshoring. So we've been
Yes.
supporting some acquisition funds. When I say funds, some smaller. Acquirers, family run businesses who
Mhm.
have been looking for onshore, traditional manufacturing companies that have been around for 20, 30, 40 years, where there's all of this, work coming back to them from Asia. And they have these companies that had a lot of skilled people. A lot of them are very rural, and then they're starting to scale them up and grow them. It's what's so interesting. People don't realize what's happening in these plants is that they're taking market share away from Asia, but this is stuff that's going into Walmart. This is
Correct.
stuff that's going into big box stores. So people a lot of times are thinking that onshoring on manufacturing is only for specialty, and it's absolutely not. They're finding it is cheaper, better, faster, with less logistics hassle to produce a lot of things here on shore. And I love that shift. I think it's great for our economy.
Yes.
We've been financing those, and it's interesting. I know they have issues filling their roles out in the rural communities. There's no
You
doubt.
bet. I mean, we work with a manufacturing company in a community that
Hmm.
the community has 6,100 people in it.
Yeah.
And there's a factory in there. They make every single command strip in America.
Hmm.
So
Mm.
every renter that sticks something on their wall with a little piece
Yeah.
of putty and they can hang their
Yeah.
picture on there, it's coming from a community of 6,100 in South
Yeah.
Dakota.
That's
And
cool.
that is so cool to be able to
Yeah.
say, this is where this is coming from.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Right. And
it's
mhm.
great. And I think what's also been really helpful for us is we have a rural job board um, that
Mhm.
we only post, our jobs, and people, there's so many, and we take the, like every staffing company, we take the name of the company off. We just want you to read the job description. And it surprises our clients all of the time. We say, there's two things that you're going to see on our job board. We take your name off, we make your job description neutral, and we require pay transparency. And so you have to put your pay on there because I don't want to send a single one of my people to you and have your pay be a surprise. Are you okay with both of those things? And they say, yeah. And they're just, I mean, if you Google a job in their zip code and we've got a job, we're showing up.
That's
And
great.
we're really, really successful with our rural job board. And it's really, really helpful for our clients.
Very cool. Let me ask you a question in regards to the differences in the way employees, candidates are being hired from pre-pandemic till now. So I'm curious, what have you seen? Fundamental shifts in employer and employee or candidate behavior pre and post pandemic.
How more emphatically can I say yes on that? Um, so from
Love
the
to hear what
healthcare,
some of those are.
Oh my gosh. So from the healthcare standpoint, I mean, at the height of COVID, any travel division, any travel nurse division would say if there was a contract for under $6,000 a week, at the end of the pandemic, people just weren't getting out, weren't even considering it because it was just everybody was printing money. Um, the travel nurse market has really retracted. It's gone back into its normal form, and so a lot of those staffing companies that are strictly focused on nursing are struggling. Like you've got to diversify your industries that you're recruiting for. Um, when it comes to light industrial, like we're in renewable energy, into cannabis, labor, light industrial, all of that stuff. Um, there is such a need for workers. There's a glut. However, I'm going to throw clients under the bus because they still think that they can hire for pennies on the dollar. For,
Right,
as inflation has gone up, pay
right,
must go up too. And
right.
so
It's been
you
a hard transition.
it's been really hard for it to go from being an employer-centered market to an employee-centered market. It's
Right,
been employer-centered for decades, and now it's shifting.
right,
And so you've got to pay. The other thing that is happening is that um, employers are shuffling their feet, and
right.
they're taking too long to hire,
Hmm.
and they're losing good candidates because they're going to the highest bidder. I mean, they've got families to feed, so they're gonna whoever says yes, that's what we tell them in travel, right? Whichever
Yeah.
offer you get first, you say yes to. And
Hmm.
so that's what our people are actually doing. And so there's sometimes some really arbitrary barriers that people put up that slows down the hiring process.
Right,
So, yeah, there's a big difference between post pandemic. I think people's values had changed to what they were willing to do for work versus what they don't want to do for work anymore. They're a
right.
little bit more specific, and
Hmm.
employers sometimes don't know what they're doing. Am I okay
Yeah.
to say that?
No, it's true. I mean, everybody knows that, and you didn't call anybody out. The reality is many don't, right? So you have to. You're part of your. What you do is to help them and consult with
Yeah.
them to be able to make them better at what they are doing. You need to be giving them feedback, and it does.
Mhm.
The good clients will take that, and the ones that you're not going to work for won't,
Right.
right?
Right.
So. Well, great. Well, this is the Growth Game podcast. So let's talk a little bit about pattern matching. Let's talk about pattern matching, things that some of my audience can take away. Certainly, not all of them are going to, go have such a fundamental shift and do what you're doing with the rural focus, which I love. I think it's a great business model, by the way. But let's talk a little bit about some of the things that you think are going to happen in regards to the your hope for your plans. Like, where do you want to take your business, and what are some of the things that you're thinking about to be able to plan your next 3 to 5 years of growth goals?
This is the what do you want to be when you grow up question, right?
It
Uh,
is.
what do we want Porchlight to be
Jessica
when
Myers,
Porchlight
what do you want to be when you grow up?
you know, we are so grateful that people have really agreed with our vision of where we've been so far, that
Yeah.
we're growing like gangbusters, which is so
Hmm.
exciting.
Very cool.
We're right now in the middle of expanding into 6 new states, and that
Okay.
we're exploding like crazy because people are starting to really understand. And I will say this is the benefit of COVID, is that
Yeah.
people really understood, oh, hey, there's this whole middle part of the country that
Hmm.
there's a ton of great space and there's tons of
Yeah.
jobs. That's the misconception about rural, is that they say
Right.
there's no jobs there. Um,
Right.
there's so many jobs and so many cool jobs. Um,
Hmm.
there's most careers in rural areas are not ag based. They're mostly
Yeah.
tech based, and that's what people
Wow.
don't understand. And
Wow.
so we're expanding into um, we're in the middle of negotiating a couple healthcare contracts. We're moving into other states to work in manufacturing. You know,
Okay.
we're open and growing. What I would love to see for Porchlight is to be the
Hmm.
hub for rural, and I would love to be able to compete right up against Indeed. Indeed is so
Yeah.
pay to play, and some of those
Yep.
bigger, like whoever's got the
Hmm.
most dollars they want to sling at these job posts will
Yeah.
get it.
Yeah.
Rural doesn't operate that way. Rural still
Right.
runs on a handshake and eye
Yeah.
contact. And
Yeah.
I love that. And that is
Yeah.
true
So
all
do
over the
I.
nation.
Yeah, so do I. I love that. I mean, I'd much rather have a relationship and buy from people that I enjoy,
Yes.
conversing with. And people talk about tech and AI taking jobs and all, and the recruiting and staffing industry going away because of tech. And it's just it's not at all where I see it going. You have to have the human element, and people want to buy from people, from personal brands, from individuals that they connect with, that also have a support of a business that is cooperative with or aligns with their values. And so I love that, handshake and looking in their eyes and be able to do business with those people. So that sounds great. Super excited to see your growth of your business. I love your business model, like I've said. You've talked about expanding into multiple states. Are you picking geographically states that you can reach? Like, so are you kind of growing inward outward, or are you taking any big leaps across the country?
Both. So
Okay.
we are this is actually a really neat story. So um the natural progression from South Dakota is naturally Arizona.
Okay.
And I mean, it's not at
Yeah,
all. Because
exactly.
you're
I'm
like,
trying to
how
figure
the
that
heck are
one
you
out.
going to Arizona? And this is how we're expanding into Arizona. Um, One of my last travelers that I placed, she was an SLP, and
Mhm.
she had actually run away from the altar. I don't think she'll mind me
Oh,
telling the story.
literally.
She had run away from the altar, and she
Okay.
goes, "I got to get out of my state. I need
Yeah.
to go to Montana." And I was like, "Great, let's go to Montana." So got her into a 13-week in Montana,
Mhm.
and she goes, "I got to get out of Montana. I want to go to Arizona." And I'm like, "Great, let's go to Arizona." Arizona's licensing board is interesting. She
Uh-huh.
sailed through it.
Nice.
I placed her into this last position. This was 5 years ago.
Oh, wow.
Fast for, fast forward, and
Mhm.
I never gave my personal phone number out ever,
Yeah.
except for two people. She
Uh-huh.
was one of them because I adored her.
Yeah.
Well, 2 years ago, like, we've lightly kept in contact,
Uh-huh.
and 2 years ago, she goes, "Hey, can you help me find people?" And I was like, "You better believe it." And my one of my last travelers is now the CEO of
Ah,
this company, and
nice.
we're starting a PT contract and doing all of her allied
Beautiful.
recruiting.
I
So
love it. I love it.
that is the coolest connection. And
Yeah.
then I love sharing my vision of my company and, like, how we're growing this
Yeah.
business. And
Right.
so I get asked to speak at a lot of conferences, and when people
Mm-hmm.
see that and I say this directly, I live in a community of, a quarter of a million people, and I
Yeah.
look, and we're a healthcare hub in the
Yeah.
Midwest, and I look at every
Mhm.
one of these hospitals and I say, I don't care about these big hospitals. I
Right.
want your regional ones. I want your community clinics.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
they go, interesting, and then carry on with
Mm-hmm.
their lives. And I'm like,
Yeah.
mistake. But
Yeah.
it's at other conferences that people will say, can you
Mm-hmm.
come speak to us? We have an
Right.
independent health system over here. We'd love to hear more about this.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how we're going to do it. And like I said at the beginning, like, we're doing everything upside down and backwards and the hardest way
Yeah.
possible, but
Right.
it's having the most impact. And,
Yeah.
and I
That's
will
great.
say this, we track our people, like, how long do
Mm-hmm.
they stay.
Yeah.
So even after 90 days, like,
Okay.
we make sure we're in contact with them for those first 90 days. I always say the
Yeah.
first 90 days are on us. After that, it's on
Yeah.
you.
Right.
We have an 85% success rate after 90
Uh-huh.
days. So
That's
the
great.
people that we're sending love
Mm-hmm.
it, and they're
They're sticking.
sticking. And that's
Yeah.
what we want. I don't want to have to keep recruiting the same position. And
No.
that's what I
No.
tell people all the time. It's like one
Mm-hmm.
and done,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
it's
Say
working.
and build it. Well, that's awesome. I love it. I've really been an enjoyable conversation. I appreciate so much. I think there's been some really good food for thought in regards to planning and thinking about really how the demographics of this country. It's super interesting. Some of the numbers that you provided, and I really love that you found a specific niche. You found a specific, angle to your business that you're running with. And I wish you nothing more than incredible success, and we will be tracking your success, Jessica. So
Thank
we'll have to
you.
do, well, we will have to do this again in a couple of years and see where you've come to. And and how much you've expanded into the rural communities of America. So really
I would love
appreciate
it.
your time today on the Growth Game podcast. It's been great to have you, Jessica. Please stay in touch with us and our audience, and we will continue to see you grow. And so that's a wrap from the Growth Game podcast for another week here. Again, Paul DeLuca, CEO of Meritus Capital. It was great having our conversation today, and looking forward to seeing how Jessica impacts and her company impacts the rural communities of America. Until next time, that's a wrap.